this show on the road. All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Noel Gonzales, and I am the student body president, and I am a member of the Arcadia Votes Committee. On behalf of Arcadia Votes, thank you for being here. Yes, come on. Let's make some noise. Yes. Thank you. Arcadia Votes is our nonpartisan campus-wide initiative to encourage civil participation on campus and get out the vote. Yes. As an Arcadia student and a first-time voter, I am thrilled to have so many resources and opportunities made available to me. I think our campus is a great incubator for civil discourse, and I'm so excited about tonight and participating in this election. I would like to thank all the people involved in putting this event together. Big round of applause for the full Arcadia Votes team. Chestnut Hill Rotary Club. Yes. The panelists and our moderator for this evening. Our moderator, David Hawkings, whom it is my pleasure to introduce. Mr. Hawkings relocated to Philadelphia in 2021 after more than 3 decades in Washington as a political and congressional correspondent and newsroom leader. Mr. Hawkins, to summarize his 23 years at the Congressional Quarterly and his successor, QC Roll Call, in brief, he did it all. Highlights include directing all legislative and political coverage and editing Politics in America, and a book published every 2 years profiling each member of Congress. Yeah, I know, pretty amazing. I just gave him his compliments. He was also then founding editor of the Fulcrum, launching as the only news site devoted entirely to covering the dysfunctions of American democracy and efforts to fix them. Early in his career, he was Washington's correspondent for a chain of Midwest newspapers and a reporter, columnist, and editor at the San Antonio Light. Let's welcome David Hawkins with a big round of applause.
Thank you to my colleagues at the Rotary Club of Chestnut Hill for thinking this might be a good idea. I just want to say one word about the Rotary Club. For those of you who don't know, it is one of the largest humanitarian organizations in the entire world. There are 1.5 million members, 46,000 clubs, 200 countries. And right here in Chestnut Hill, we try to do both actual hands-on work and then raise money to give to others to do the hands-on work. So we do service projects ranging from, painting face-to-face in Germantown to preparing food at Prevention Point in the Kensington neighborhood, buying and distributing books for public schools in our neighborhood. And then we do fundraisers, which we then spend about $30,000 a year on donations to other people who are doing equally good work. All the while, our motto is to do good work while having fun. And this is fun. This is fun for me to do this. So I am going to get right to it. I'm going to get right to it because these people on the stage with me, none of whom I had met before this summer, because as Noel said, I'm a recent transplant to Chestnut Hill. So I've just met them all this year. I'm pleased to say they are all as smart as they are succinct. They are clever, they are quick, and they have smart things to say. So the way we're gonna start this, and I'm gonna do this in alphabetical order, is just say one sentence of introduction, and then ask them in a minute or so to sort of set the stage by saying, why did they agree to come here tonight? Because I think that might help you understand how each of them comes at this from a very different perspective, which is sort of what you want in a panel discussion. So from my far left, Norristown's Angie Hinton is the executive director of PA Youth Vote, which she started in 2021 to improve civic engagement by young Pennsylvanians, especially from communities of color. So Angie, why are you here?
I'm here to make sure that people understand how to mobilize and engage young people. And so I work with young people every day, and I think that it's important to understand that some young people are not getting access or equitable access to education around how government works, right, and civics. And so that has a lot to do with why you see disparity in participation. And it's not that they're apathetic. So I want to definitely squash that. It's that they don't have the education or the same access to it. And so I'm hoping that people understand that and then take away from this the need to hold leaders accountable to making sure that there's equitable access to not only education resources, but civics education as well.
Thank you. So Amy Widestrom might be familiar to some in the audience because she was the chair of the political science department here until just a few months ago, and was
9 months ago.
and was on the faculty for a dozen years, and is now the head of the League of Women Voters in Pennsylvania. And why are you here?
So I am here for a few reasons. One, it's nice to see you all again. So thanks for having us. But mostly, I really want to make sure the mission of the League is to empower voters and defend democracy. And what that looks like on the ground is to make sure that all voters know what they need to know so they can exercise their right to vote. And in the state of Pennsylvania, that can be a little confusing sometimes if you're trying to figure out how to navigate the mail-in balloting process or figure out how to show up at the polls. And so I'm here to make sure you have the information you need so you can cast your ballot in a way that works for you.
Very good, thank you. Next up is Farah Jimenez from Chestnut Hill, who has been the executive director of the Philadelphia Education Fund for 8 years, and is also the board chair of the online media nonprofit Broad and Liberty, and like the person to her right, you can often see these two on channels ABC6 talking about politics and elections and smart analysis from each of them. So, Farah, what brings you here tonight?
Well, thank you for saying it's smart analysis. It's analysis. I don't know how smart it is. Thank you for that introduction. I am here because as a Black Latina who has worked her entire life in social services and in social action, I think it bewilders people that I'm also a conservative. And it's a perspective often not heard in Philadelphia. So given the rising temperature that we have today, when conservatives and liberals or conservatives and progressives are talking to each other, I find myself in a really interesting place where I think I can serve as a balm or salve to people who are really anxious about what may be the result of this election. So that's why I'm here, hoping to calm some nerves and help us be able to have dialogue across difference.
Very much. All right. And last and certainly, of course, not least, Sam Katz of Westmount Airy is now the executive producer of History Making Productions, which is a filmmaking company that allows him to explore his interest in the history and economics and politics of his hometown of Philadelphia. He was the Republican nominee for mayor in both 1999 and 2003, and has since affiliated as both a Democrat and, I believe, still currently an independent. Sam, what brings you here?
Suppose what brings me here, aside from the arm twisting that you did, was that I am the only person on the stage who has a perfect record in politics. I'm 0 for 4. And I often on with Farah on Inside Story on Sunday morning. I don't know, we do it Friday, but it's on Sunday. And I'm here to share what thoughts I have about how we get through this election. And I should characterize my own personal political philosophy as a radical centrist.
There you go. Thank you.
And David, just to add a little bit of humor.
I'm sorry?
I was an early volunteer with Sam Katz for mayor campaign both times.
There you go. All right.
Big fan of Sam Katz.
Thank you. Sorry it didn't work out for us.
So here's what we're going to do. We're going to do a presentation here for a little while, and maybe, I don't know, 40 minutes or so. Time for questions. We have some students who've already submitted questions that we're going to get to. We'd like to then get to some more questions from the audience. I just want to emphasize, I get a sense from the vibe in the room that you all understand that this is not an evening about partisan politics. This is not an evening to discuss or advocate for one side or the other. This is an evening to be educated about sort of civics, which is and politics, not in the electoral politics sense, but in the policy sense. One of the things we want to discuss tonight is what are the issues that are going to drive Pennsylvanians to either pick one candidate or another for the president and for the Senate. And So with that, I guess we'll start with, the big picture. Why does Pennsylvania matter most? There you go. And I'm going to hand the pointer to Sam and ask him to just walk us through the basics of why Pennsylvania matters most. I can do that, yeah.
Technology I'm not capable of there.
Okay.
So let's start with the Electoral College,
Do it.
because everybody would love to get rid of it. But we need to understand really quickly how we got it. And when the framers of the Constitution met in Philadelphia in 1787, there were three things they were frightened of. They were frightened of the American people, they were frightened of politicians, and they were frightened of kings. And for them, a president had the potential to be a king, so they were frightened of the president. They didn't want to give Congress the power to select the president because they didn't trust politicians. They didn't want to give the people the power to select the president because they didn't trust the people. And they didn't want the president to be too powerful. So they came up with something called the Electoral College. And in it, every state got the number of House and Senate members, which gave small states at least 3 members of the Electoral College. In order to amend the American Constitution, you need a vote of 2/3 of the Congress and 75% of the states. And so to change anything in the Electoral College system, which by the way is not referenced in the Constitution, only electors, you would have to get all of these states who now have 3 electoral votes to vote against themselves. Okay, so why does Pennsylvania matter? We have 17 members of Congress and 2 senators. We have 19 electoral votes. Electoral votes. So we are going to go to the polls and we're going to vote for a presidential candidate. But in fact, what we're voting for is the selection of electors who will then go send their electoral ballots into Harrisburg. They will be certified, sent to Washington. On January 6th, the Congress will certify them. That's the process. Pennsylvania has 19 of them. There are supposedly just 7 states that are swing states. Michigan, Wisconsin seem to be tilting to the Democrats. North Carolina, Georgia seem to be tilting to the Republicans. Arizona and Nevada are up in the air. Pennsylvania is up in the air. So when you try to get to 270, which is the number of electoral votes you need to be elected president, it's very hard to conceive either Trump or Harris gets there without 19 electoral votes from Pennsylvania. However, there are 265 mathematical permutations by which either of them could become president, and some of them exclude Pennsylvania.
Yeah. Okay, so now that we got that figured out, we'll try this. Did you want to say something?
I just wanted to add something quickly. I have a 15-year-old at home who some of my students in the room know, and she was grilling me from the backseat of the car the other day, asking me why a vote matters if we have these electors. And what has evolved over time is that states have required, and Pennsylvania is one of them, that the electors are all assigned to vote the way the majority of the state votes. So it's not like you could go vote and the electors are going to change their mind and vote for somebody else. If the majority of the state votes for one candidate, that's who all 19 electors will vote for. So you are essentially electing your representatives to speak for you in the Electoral College. So your vote still matters, even though you've got these 19 electors out there actually casting the ballot to be certified. I just wanted to
Just a really quick thing. 2 states only, Nebraska and Maine, have popular voting by congressional district for the electors. Every other state, as Amy said, is winner takes all. That provision could be changed in each state. Each state decides how the electors are going to get picked, not the Constitution or the federal government.
That's great.
And so what you'll see from the map, just to be clear, in the case of Nebraska there, where did it go? You see that, whoa, sorry guys. You see that it says 1 in blue and the other 4 in red. That is because one congressional district, the one centered in Omaha, seems very likely to vote Democratic. And up in Maine, you see 3 in blue and 1 in red. That is because the congressional district for the most rural part of Maine, essentially everything north of Portland, is very likely to vote red, vote for Trump. So each congressional district gets one elector, and then the statewide winner gets 2 electors. So that's the way that works. So that's why only in those 2 do you see the little sort of bifurcation of the numbers. In all the rest, it's Electoral College, winner take all, per popular vote in that state. So there you go. So now that we get that figured out, which is, and you know, it is what it is, right? So we can talk all night about should it be, why shouldn't it be? But for now, we will move on to, so now we know that Pennsylvania matters most because it's the biggest prize of the swing states. Why? And here's another, here's a little nerd out, just one quick nerd out. You can see that Pennsylvania tends to vote for the winner. In fact, in 10 of the last 12 elections of the last half century, it voted for the winner. The only 2 times it did not was it voted for George Bush, W. Bush, both times. Every other time it has voted for the winner. Sometimes by very, very narrow margins, just to make the point again as to why, you know, we're a swing state. That's where it was the last 2 times. So super tight. So that's why Pennsylvania matters most. And we're going to skip over these for right now. Why does this area matter? Why does the Philadelphia metro area matter the most? Who wants to tackle that? You could tackle that, Farah.
Well, I actually disagree with that premise. I actually don't think we matter all that much.
Okay.
So the Pennsylvania absolutely swings, but within Pennsylvania, there are 3, arguably just 2 counties that are considered pivot or bellwether counties. They're the ones that have really swayed the election one way or the other. So they've either voted more consistently voted for the winner, and they've switched their vote. So there's Erie and Northampton counties are the ones that have voted for it was Obama twice, and then Trump, and then Biden. And so right now there's some really interesting polling that's taking place. I think the group is Signal that just issued a poll that talked about where those 2 counties are and where they're trending. And right now they're trending towards Trump. But more importantly, was also doing some polling of why is that? Where is that coming from? What are the issues that are at the top for them? And it tends to be some of the things we're seeing nationally, which is the economy. They feel that Trump is much stronger in the economy. The men there are by double digits more likely to vote for Trump. The women are more likely to vote for Harris. There are some just some key issues that you're seeing emanate in those 2 counties, which are suggesting that they're actually trending towards Trump. The rest of us matter, but it seems that those 2 counties have been the ones that have been more willing to switch their allegiance. Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, you're going to see us go blue. You'll see Dauphin County go blue. The rest of the middle of the state will go red. There's only really these 2 counties that have been going back and forth.
Amy?
I would say that part of the narrative, though, about the collar counties that surround Philadelphia and why, so Bucks County, for example, people are looking to, and I think part of why that's the case is that we've seen some what we might call secular or long-term realignment in these counties, where they used to be sort of more strongly conservative and they've sort of trended less conservative over time. And so there have been these long-term trends in these collar counties around Philadelphia that make them really interesting places to watch. So not quite the bellwether counties that we're seeing. Erie, like you said, Northampton, there's Luzerne, Lackawanna, Monroe. These are in, I've learned all the counties since taking this job. These are in sort of northeast Pennsylvania and then out in the Northwest, but I keep dropping my pen, but the collar counties in Pennsylvania have really changed over time, and they do really, the populations in them do really, I think, struggle publicly with some of the things that voters struggle with publicly. And so I think that they are interesting places to watch, even if technically they don't tend to be the bellwether counties in the state.
I'll just say that there is there definitely has been some movement. A lot of it is really from Philadelphians moving into those counties. And so when you look at the voter registration more recently, there's been, over the last 10 years, a real shift statewide towards more Republican registration. And so you've seen the numbers go down. I think it used to be a difference of about 900,000. It's now only about 300,000 difference between Republicans the majority being Democrats. Democrats still have more registered voters in the Commonwealth, but it has really declined significantly. Bucks County flipped recently. There's been some real efforts to flip Bucks County, and they've succeeded. And then to the extent that you've seen any of the counties, so I think 64 of the 67 counties have all transitioned or stayed Republican. Only 3 have gotten more blue, and those are ones where you've seen Philadelphia migrate. So that's Chester, Delaware, and Monco.
Gotcha.
But Bucks even became more red.
Right. And altogether, just another nerd factor, statewide, the Philadelphia metro area, the city and the 4 collar counties, a third of the statewide vote, essentially split 11% from the city, 22% of the statewide vote comes from those 4 counties. So it's a big chunk of the vote. And of course, in a state where every vote matters, which is kind of like the point of tonight, you know, all of what you're saying, and whether we flip one county or another, or whether in the case of this little answer to a trivia question behind you, I mean, if these numbers change just a bit, like Joe Biden did better than Hillary Clinton in the city. How much better? I mean, like 3 point, he went from 81 to 84. And he went from, in the collar counties, he went from 56 to 59. And that was the difference, right? So, you know, what you look up there at our neighborhoods, and it's like, oh, it's overwhelmingly blue. Well, I can just sit home and read a book. But if it makes a difference whether Cheltenham is 85% Biden. If it goes to 87% for Biden, it might make a difference. If it goes down to 80, it could make a difference. I mean, these are tiny, tiny margins. So that's what I got for you there.
I would add one thing about this area. And I think all the polls and all of the pundits, myself included, all people who look back at bellwethers and sample sizes are discounting the demographic shift that's occurring right now with the aging of the boomers, aging out of the boomers, and the rise in 18 to 35-year-olds. And if 18 to 35-year-olds come out in any proportions higher, but whether they're for Trump or for Harris, anything that we thought about in the past is mathematically irrelevant. And I would urge you to be cautious about responding to polls because, first of all, when I ran for mayor in 1991, you had to make 12 calls to get a person to answer the questions. And now it's closer to 33. And ask yourself the question, how many times have you answered the phone and taken a poll? So I do think there's a lot of issues with the sample, but the sample will never include anyone who didn't vote in the last election. And so the question is whether you are going to bring them out.
Right. All right. So Angie, why does turnout matter? How's that for a low? Have that for a.
Well, I'll say this. All of the information you just heard is very informative, right, and impressive. But I am primarily working with young adults in communities of color in underfunded school districts, okay? And so for them, all of that, they're not really ever even being taught, right? What they know is they live in communities that seem like they're never responded to, right? They live in a system that doesn't really engage them or listen to them. And they just never really are seeing this process, which feels very ugly and chaotic, benefit them. And so they're really very disinterested in participating in a lot of ways. And so what we have done is, because they're not getting a lot of times the traditional access to civics, is really the way we found most successful to engage young people is to honestly lead by listening, right? So listening to them, understanding what issues really are important to them, and then providing that connection for them to up and down the ballot, those elected officials, and how they are essentially hired to address those concerns and address those issues. And when you can make those connections for young people, right, it really does make them understand the importance of how it's relevant to them, right? It makes it resonate for them. And they really are very action oriented. They're not apathetic at all. It's, again, they're not getting this information in a way that is digestible. You know, and again, they live in communities where, regardless of which party has been in power, they have not seen the benefits of this process. And so we are working with them. We are engaging them in a way that is youth-centered, right? That is really culturally relevant and makes sense for them. That's another thing. Politics is so, I worked in the Senate for a little bit, and I'll be honest, when I went to the Capitol, I never really felt like it was a comfortable place for me. Most people didn't look like me or come from where I came from. And so we're really trying to figure out ways to engage young people in a way where they feel like they want to be a part of it. And so, you know, whether we're doing on Thursday a civic themed field day for young people, where they'll come out and they'll have some fun, but they'll also have an obstacle course on how a bill becomes a law, right? Or whether we do, a march where we are working with, elected officials in the city and the school district to educate, register, and then have young people fill in mail-in ballots and then bring them down, and they have a huge march around City Hall, and really have an opportunity to party with a purpose. There's different ways that we found that when you engage them and you really, again, bring it to a digestible, right? Like a talking points, and you really kind of bring them into the conversation and listen to them. Oftentimes we want young people to participate and we invite them to a table to talk at them. And they're very disinterested in that. They're very independent thinkers. And so I think you will see, as we move forward, young people being more and more engaged. We have seen in the engagement we've done in Philadelphia, for instance, 18-year-old is primarily who we're engaging. We're in high schools in Philadelphia, and it's a collaborative effort. But the turnout for the young people that we're educating and engaging was double the turnout of any other Gen Z age in Philadelphia. And so it does work, but you really just have to make sure that you're understanding and taking into consideration they don't have the education, and then also bringing in their lived experience and the lack of responsiveness they've seen. And then you can start to have a conversation about how this is a process that really provides you with the empowerment to hold leaders accountable to addressing all of the things that you want to see changed in this world.
Thank you. All right. Let me ask if this is a saleable point to your audience, which is, I just figured this out when I made this chart. So that's the total population, 13 million of us in Pennsylvania. Sorry. And then we go down to the number of votes that actually gets cast the last time, and it's 7 million votes. Because you got to discount for, you got to be older than 18 to vote. You've got to be eligible to vote, which means, you have to be a citizen and you have to be not incarcerated, are the two main reasons that you wouldn't be eligible to vote. And then you have to go to the trouble of registering. So what I suddenly realized was that every person who casts a vote in Pennsylvania is casting a vote essentially for two people. You're casting a vote not only for yourself, but you're casting a vote on behalf of your children who are younger than 18, your siblings who are younger than 18, your friends who are undocumented, your friends who are incarcerated. I mean, that's power to me. It's like, it's double, you have a double whammy. You cast a vote, you're casting a vote for two of your fellow Pennsylvanians. So I'd like to try that on your audience. Would it work?
It does work. I mean, we have young people that turn around and say they can't vote. We have young people that work with us all the time that are not eligible to vote, but they're out there organizing voter registration drives, and they will say to adults, please vote for me because I can't yet vote. And so it does work. Young people are very empathetic, and really do care a lot about things like equity. And so they're very much casting their votes for things that will benefit the whole of society.
So on that's a great segue to a chunk of time that I want to devote to, and this was the panel said, well, it doesn't have to be just about civics. It can be, part of why Pennsylvania matters most and part of what's going to motivate people to vote is a little bit of a discussion of the issues that will shape the outcome in our state. So which ones are they? I think we sort of agreed as a group when we had our little pre-call that the one that most immediately comes to mind, and it's the one that the global press, when they have to pick an issue in Pennsylvania, they tend to pick energy/fracking, and aligned with climate change. So is that an issue? Is that an issue? Should it be an issue? Will it be an issue?
It's definitely an issue in the places where fracking is done.
Right.
And I do think that there's a misunderstanding about the extent to which fracking employs people. Fracking in Pennsylvania employs 26,000 people. Construction employs 260,000 people. Fracking has also become a really important component of the source of energy for the country because of our shift from oil to natural gas. But I don't see it as I think anybody who is solid for fracking is solid for Trump. And anybody who is against fracking on climate is solid for Harris. And I don't see, I mean, I think it's a big talking point issue. I don't think it's a big influencer.
What is a big influencer? I think we all know one of them.
So I was going to say that agreeing with Sam, but taking a different tact on it, is that while fracking is mostly going to matter to the deeply to those counties where fracking is occurring, I think for many it can also signal a broader question around how will our federal government or how will our presidential candidate wield their influence around an area of economy that matters to me. So if I feel that I'm concerned about fracking because of the health and the vitality that it can give to the economy in Pennsylvania, I might have some concerns about electing a candidate that's really more interested in regulating an industry that does provide real resources, not just jobs to my family, but resources for the Commonwealth, where there's opportunities that we can exploit, but now we can't exploit. There was a recent interview I'm involved, as you had mentioned, with Broaden Liberty, which is an online portal, and we have a podcast called Voices of Reason, and we had the gentleman who leads the PA Chamber of Commerce, Luke Bernstein, interviewed on our podcast, and his interview went viral because he talked about the U.S. Steel's decision to not invest in Pennsylvania and to go elsewhere because of the regulatory environment that we have in the Commonwealth. So if you're interested in that subject, it can go beyond the job for my family. It can become a broader question around regulations or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly when we've got thousands of members and subscribers across the state, and so when we're out traveling around, when I'm out traveling around, what I'm hearing in the Western counties is that this issue really does matter, but for lots of reasons that you were talking about, not so much that the fracking itself, the act of fracking matters. It's sort of what it represents. On the other hand, there's a great deal of movement across the counties to sort of reimagine what other kinds of models of economies could look like. And that, as you said, can map on to the political spectrum in really interesting ways, right? So if you're reimagining a new economy not based in fracking, that might lead you to be inclined in one direction. If you are believing that fracking or more traditional industry is the way to sustain or redevelop your economy, that might lead you in another direction. So it's not always a one-to-one. It's not always directly about fracking. I do think it is sort of a cipher or a symbol for how the economies are feeling in these particularly Western counties. They also feel sort of forgotten by the eastern part of the state a lot. So there's some resentment there. That I think contributes to that could contribute to how the counties end up going.
So if the economy generally, you're saying maybe fracking per se not up for grabs, as Sam said, but the economy is still up for grabs.
Yep.
I mean, the other top tier issues that people seem to be talking about, do you see any of the other ones that's up for grabs? Is immigration still up for grabs among undecided voters? Is reproductive rights? I don't.
Both of these issues are major issues, but they're deeply dividing kinds of issues where persuasion is not in the cards. I don't think, for example, the candidate from Ohio, so we can get out of Pennsylvania, who said that women over 50 shouldn't care about abortion. That really is, they do, and they always will. And the reproductive rights issue is not about your age, it's about your freedom. So but you also have to recognize that the people who are pro-life, who are anti-abortion, feel as strongly about that as do the people who want reproductive rights. The difference being that the anti-abortion stance means that the pro-reproductive rights stance are denied. Nobody who is pro-reproductive is telling anyone who is pro-life to get an abortion. So that becomes a loss of right. And I think that the economic issues here are going to be very important, and particularly to the Southwest. Yes, for fracking. It's also true that if the president signs an executive order tomorrow banning fracking, it has absolutely no impact because fracking is regulated by the state of Pennsylvania and by every other state. But these other issues seem to me to be what's pulling us. These are the things that are pulling us apart. And we can't find a way to talk about freedoms of reproduction, freedoms of the ability to have a sensible immigration system, because we're so fractured on these issues that they underlie, and I think they go to the point, people feel that they don't have a stake. And the kids that you're trying to deal with have had it proven to them that they don't have a stake. And so a lot of people who fought in Afghanistan and Iraq and came back and were not supported by the Veterans Administration or by anything, they don't have a stake. And that anger for not having a stake in some cases causes people not to participate. But here, Donald Trump has tapped into that and engaged people to participate as a means of expressing that. And that's what's making the conversation really difficult.
Angie,
Yeah, no, I think, most people, I am, in addition to running this nonprofit organization, I'm also the president of an NAACP in Norristown. And so that is one of the most perfect examples I can give you as to why people do not want to participate or don't feel like there's really any reason for them to participate in this process. Now, I have access to more information than most of them because of me being in the role that I'm serving in. And so you had a lot of people, prior to this recent change at the top of the ticket, that were completely disinterested in participating. And many people are like, well, why? The choices couldn't be more drastic, like stark, right? And so if we go back to 2020, right, and we remember the last election, and we had a lot of promises made, in particular to Black people, right, about if this election happened, we were going to address all of these inequities, we were going to create all these new policies, right, and then an election happened, and none of that happened. They have no idea, because they're not getting the education, really how government works. I get people that come to me that are frustrated with things that are really your council's responsibility, but they're mad at the school district, right? And in this case, in addition to these policies that they didn't see come to fruition, we had tons and tons of money. What they don't know is we had tons and tons of money come in because we had a congressional advocate to go back and say there's a great deal of inequity within Montgomery County. And for all of us here in Montgomery County, we understand it's beautiful, right? But there are pockets of great impoverishment, and Norristown is one of them. And so we sent tons and tons of money to Montgomery County to address all of these inequities, right? But instead of investing in our school district, which is grossly underfunded, instead of investing in our library, which is literally falling apart and serves as a place for unhoused people, instead of finding affordable housing for the people in Montgomery County, we were giving them tents, right? And instead of recreational programming for the kids in Norristown who are in underfunded school districts and often lack in access to recreational programming, we spent millions of dollars on bike trails that go all around Norristown, and $500 million on a courthouse that literally just locks up people that look like the people who live in Norristown every day. And we were told that would bring new business. So you live in a place like that and you have those experiences, why would you want to participate? Now, I know that the federal dollars did come down, and I know that that's local investment in the community that made those decisions. But most people in these communities, young people in these schools, are not being taught this. And so you have so much confusion about who does what, right? And then the lived experience where regardless of who's in power, it never benefits us. And that's where you see this lack of interest in participating in a process that just never really seems to benefit these people.
So it's powerful stuff. To pick up on what you said, I think most of us believed when the matchup looked like it was going to be a rematch between President Biden and President Trump, that there was no way the turnout was going to match what it had been in 2020, which actually was a record in the past, a record in modern times as measured by when half the country got the right to vote, i.e. women. In that time, the highest percentage turnout was, last time, 67%. I don't think any of us would have said it would have been close to that when it was a Biden-Trump election. Do you think that a Harris-Trump election will come close to that or not? We're not going to predict the outcome, but we're going to predict the turnout.
What I will say is, right, there's a shift in energy culturally. The campaign looks different, right? People see maybe someone that looks like them, right? My concern is, and why it's important to make sure people are getting education, because regardless of what happens in this election, there's another election, right? And so for me, as a person who knows, we had Barack Obama, and a lot of people showed up for that candidate, right? But then no one showed up in the next election and the next election. And so we really don't spend a lot of time really focusing on the presidential or any candidates. We almost never talk about candidates. We really go up and down the ballot as far as what's at stake. And so, for example, we know young people care very much about, again, racial justice. So there's an attorney general race here. And whether or not police accountability was pursued in George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Mike Brown look very different depending on who your attorney general is, right? There's a school funding issue in Pennsylvania. You have your state reps and your state senators who were told by a court they need to fix this inequitable school funding system. So that's really how we focus on it, is really making sure you understand up and down the ballot how all of these seats impact you directly, and why you need to pay attention to who's in those seats, vote for the one that most aligns with whatever your values are, and then follow up with holding them accountable once they're in office.
So David, one memory I have is, a memory I have that talks a bit about election behavior is, I was talking to somebody about having, if they had voted in the midterm election, it was the day of the election, and they said, I don't vote in those mini elections.
Mini elections?
Mini elections. And so there are many people who only really pay attention when there's a mayor or president at the top of the ticket. What's interesting about the last two go-arounds in Pennsylvania is that while we did see an increase in voter action activity with the Trump-Biden election, what remained true is that when it was Clinton versus Trump and when it was Biden versus Trump, the top vote getter was not the presidential candidate that won the state. It was Josh Shapiro, who is running as attorney general. And so what it says is that there are a lot of people who, and I believe this will still be true, who remain undecided into the actual election day as to whether or not they really want to vote for either of the candidates. And so I think it'll be interesting to see if it plays out the same way this time, that there's someone else on the statewide ticket that's going to outperform the presidential candidates. I also think it's important to underscore that we will pay attention a lot to the presidential race, but in Pennsylvania, we also have some important other elections going on, not just the Senate election, but we have 3 row offices that get elected at the same time that the presidential election happens: our Auditor General, our Attorney General, and I'm sorry, an inner treasurer. Yeah, and then the last time around, when Trump won, it was the Democrat who won the Attorney General, Josh Shapiro. The last time around when Biden won, Josh hung on by a thread. but it was the Republicans who were grossly overspent, who won the treasurer's office and the auditor general's office. And so that election is going to be really interesting to watch, because right now, for those 3 row offices, and this is where I may come off sounding a bit partisan, but it's, I can't help myself, sorry. We have a treasurer running for the treasurer's office who is a treasurer against a mental health counselor. We have the Republican who's running for the auditor general is an auditor running against a state elected official, statewide elected official. And then the Republican candidate for attorney general is a prosecutor and a former U.S. attorney who is running against a gentleman who was auditor general. He was auditor general before as Democrat, and who's never seen courtroom action. So I think you're going to see many Democrats, and I know many who have already signaled to me that they're going to do that are going to switch over and vote for the Republican for the row offices and vote for the Democrat for the presidential office.
So I sort of wanted to amplify the message that you just gave, which is especially for our younger voters. And, you know, I used to work with 18 to 22-year-olds most often, and people would ask me, you know, how are they? What are they like? And I would say, you know, they don't really trust us as far as they can throw us. They're not interested in that. They're not really interested in the institutions. They're not really interested in the parties, but they really care about issues, right? So I think that what we need to encourage our young voters to do is really like, what matters to you? And then find the person. And it's okay to split your ticket, but find the person who aligns with your values. And you might have to do a little research. Is the issue that matters to me a council level issue? Like maybe the president can't fix my potholes, and I shouldn't be judging him on that. But maybe the president could create a culture of change in another policy area that you really care about. So I really encourage particularly young voters to lean into those issues that matters, because I know that you're not thinking much about the parties or the institutions. But lean into the issues that matter, find the candidates that align with those values, and vote for those candidates. And I would also say, make sure that you're really educating yourself, especially around the way that elections are working on the ground. So you know that how to cast your ballot, you know where to cast your ballot, and you know what it takes to cast your ballot, right? So if you're going to do mail-in or absentee because you're college students, know when you have to request your ballot. Know what you need to do to submit those ballots. Make sure you do that on time. I would encourage you to register here and take the shuttle. It would be much easier. But those sorts of things are really what's going to matter to our younger voters, I think. And if we're going to see an increase in turnout among our young voters, it's going to be connecting to those issues, and it's going to be getting them to actually cast their ballots. And in a state like Pennsylvania, where voting can be a little confusing, that is hard, right? So we're spending a lot of time at the league just educating people on how they can vote, right? If you have questions about where your polling place is, or what date do I put on my mail-in ballot, for the love of God, and why does it matter? We can help you with that. And so that's really where I think we can see a turnout that rivals past turnouts, but we've got to empower people with the information they need to do it.
So on the Jumbotron there, for those of you who need a reminder, those are the 3 key dates. So if you haven't, rule number 1 is you don't just have to commit to voting, you have to commit to making a plan for how to vote. And to Amy's point, it's complicated in part because we have more choices in Pennsylvania than many of our fellow citizens in other states who still have pretty restrictive options. We got options. No excuse mail, some people call it absentee or mail voting. It's available to everyone. You don't have to have an excuse. There's still time to do it. There are drop boxes close by, or you can trust the U.S. mail, or you can go on election day. So those are the...
And I think it's worth noting, you may have information on the commissioner's offices. So they've created satellite voting offices in all of the councilmanic districts.
In Philadelphia. And so it's really important to know that in the state of Pennsylvania, counties have a lot of autonomy under our election code for how they actually run their elections. So like Philadelphia has satellite election offices, some counties don't. Montgomery County has ballot drop boxes, some counties don't. So it's really important to know where you're voting and what the rules are in your county in terms of voting on election day, where your precinct is and where you actually show up. And if you're using mail-in ballots, knowing how you can submit those mail-in ballots, because it really varies pretty widely across the Commonwealth.
In answer to your question, I think the turnout will be better in 2024 than it was in 2008. And I have two reasons for that. And I think it'll be better for both Trump and for Harris. And I think the issue of culture is really at the center of it. The Harris campaign has connected in a way that Barack Obama did, but not the Obama campaign. When you bring the kinds of the diversity of from Taylor Swift to somebody else, and then the Trump campaign is so focused on cultural issue, the culture wars, that both candidates, both campaigns have the ability to appeal to people away from traditional politics and policies. And for that reason, I think the turnout's going to be very high. And I think it'll be as high as 2008. That doesn't mean it gives an advantage to anybody, but I think it will be higher. I think the Trump campaign knows who didn't vote, and I think the Democrats know who didn't vote, and both are focused on getting those folks to the polls.
To that point, what's been interesting is hearing from people who've been doing the voter registration for Republicans is you wouldn't believe where they're going to registered voters. It's at the Trump rallies. There are people who are going to Trump rallies who are not registered to vote. It's shocking. So it just shows you that it's not just young people. There are a lot of people who can be very passionate about the issues, want to weigh in heavily on who should be governing, but haven't done the work to make themselves eligible to actually vote.
So I want to move on. Before we get to questions, I want to do one thing about this chart, and then I want to ask people to talk a little bit about what happens after Election Day. But just for a second, I just want to re-emphasize, so to go back to the core message, why Pennsylvania matters most, just in a numeric way. So these are the 7 swing states, and that shows the turnout in the last election, ranked from the highest turnout to the lowest turnout. And it also just, for emphasis, I tease this out. And what those are the grand total of votes from 4 years ago. And what that boils down to is for every 1,000 votes, Joe Biden got 12 more votes than Donald Trump. 12 out of every 1,000. So that's pretty close. So in this room, that's like 4 votes. It's close. So if you care at all about the outcome, for whatever reason, whatever issue motivates you, you have the power to decide the damn election. So why not do it? And all these were close, right? I mean, those are close numbers. 2.5 points is still, that's close. So it's going to be a very close election. It may be as close here as in any other state, which kind of walks into the somewhat brief, because we do want time for questions, preview of coming attractions, which I'm going to turn to Amy and Sam, about, the election won't be over on election night. I think that's a lesson we all learned 4 years ago. You'll remember that it was Pennsylvania that was the state that was not called by the Associated Press and the networks until the Saturday after the election. It was at that moment that it became clear that Joe Biden had won. Why was that, Amy? Or no, why was that, Sam? I'm going to give that one to Sam. Why was that, Sam? Why did it take until Saturday?
Well, first of all, it's not 50 state elections. We have 67 counties. It's 67 different elections. 67 different county boards of elections get to decide how to run elections in their county, how to print the ballot, where to put the machines, what publicity to give to the process. In those counties where there is a belief the elections were stolen, the county policy for this election is more difficult. There are counties in which there are no drop-off boxes. And if they were, they're on fire because their voters don't vote by mail. So I feel like we're looking at an election in which we will probably not know who the winner is, truthfully, until January 6th, because one candidate will for sure, if he wins, proclaim victory. And if he loses, will proclaim victory and then litigate until he runs out of gas. And I think there's going to be 6 close states. There's a couple of states that are never in play that could be in play. And it's just going to be ugly. If you think about Florida just for a second, and the devastation already experienced and about to be experienced in Florida 3 weeks before an election, is an election on November 5th fair to Floridians? And will they rise up in mutiny because they were denied the opportunity to vote because the polling place got blown away and the machinery got blown away and the electricity's off? So we're going to have, this is going to be historically as ugly as the Jackson, John Quincy Adams election of 1826, which some of you may remember.
I could not get my rabbit ears to work that night. And
And to Sam's point, that's already being discussed in North Carolina.
Right.
That people have been claiming, amazingly, that it was an act of government to create the storm, Helene, which devastated particular counties that tend to go red. And so you're starting to already see this kind of narrative coming out that maybe the election isn't stolen, but it certainly is going to be delivered in a way that disenfranchises particular voters. I will say one thing, though, also why it took so long, and there is a change now in the ability of the different counties to start counting ballots earlier. In the last election, remember, everything changed so quickly during COVID. And so there was just a lot of change and a lot of rules that were unclear and unsettled. And one of them was that you couldn't actually start counting the ballots that had been submitted until after the polls were closed. So obviously that delays everything with the volume that you're going to get. So that now has changed so they can actually start counting them earlier. So we should have numbers a little more
walks me
sooner.
to Amy, I'd like you to say whatever you want to say, but if you would also explain, we've been talking about the weather. Talk about the red mirage. That's the weather.
So to set some context, in 2020, right, with COVID, in 2016, 262,000 mail-in ballots were cast. 262,000. In 2020, 2.2 million were submitted and cast, right? It was this overwhelming number of ballots with pretty underspecified election laws. Act 77, which is the election code that sort of manages how we run our elections, is really silent on a lot of matters. Some of it is how we count our ballots. So now counties can start counting mail-in ballots still on election day. They can start at 7 a.m. They can start sealing the mail-in ballots, flattening them out, and getting them ready to count. It would be better if they could start that process sooner, but they cannot do that in Pennsylvania as they can in other states. So they can't start until 7 a.m. on election day, that process. What that means is, and I should say in 2022, in the midterm election, there were 1.1 million ballots cast by mail. So half of what was in 2020, but still a lot. And so there's just a lot of volume that these counties are dealing with. So know that it is unlikely that we will have full election results from Pennsylvania on election night. I think we will probably have 60 of the 67 counties, likely, but there's going to be some that are just counting ballots. It is also not new to not have full and final election results on election night, because we've always had overseas ballots, military overseas. We've always had provisional ballots. There are always ballots that need to be cast after election day. So that's not unusual. I will also say we've learned a lot since 2020, and there are a lot more systems in place. There's election law on the books now that the vote has to be certified by November 11th in the state, to be certified by December 11th in the federal level, and then to be counted on January 6th. So there are more laws supporting the process, but it's just going to take time, and we want to make sure that all votes are counted. Right? And so some of it is just patience. It is also the case that I think that folks are anticipating there will be some legal challenges following the election. So the primary legal challenges we anticipate are going to be around the mail-in ballots, so the rejection of mail-in ballots for, right? So right now, the current law as of today says that you have to sign and date your mail-in ballot, and that date has to be the date sometime between when you received the mail-in ballot and you turned it back in. Like, the government's not in your house. They don't actually know what day you signed it, but it cannot be your birthday, right? Everybody wants to sign their birthday. That's what everybody wants to write. Don't write your birthday on your mail-in ballot. And there's going to be some rejected ballots over this, assuming the law of the state holds. And so there's going to be some lawsuits over ballots that are rejected for those sorts of sort of non-material errors. There are going to be challenges to provisional ballots, we anticipate. There are going to be possible challenges to voter eligibility. We're hearing some of that come up, so challenging people's right to vote at the polls. So we are certainly hearing about and anticipating some of those legal challenges, which will just slow the results, right? And so those have to be sorted out in order for ballots to be accurately counted, and that might slow down some results in some of our counties.
And just, I think I just saw that it was yesterday that the PA Supreme Court declined to hear those cases. So I
Both
think
of them, yeah.
So I think the law is going to stand.
Oh, I think so. There's a couple of other cases. So, right. So the Supreme Court over the weekend, the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania, not of the country, denied 2 King's Bench petitions, which, to get wonky for a second, King's Bench authority is grounded in the founding of the country. When they created the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania, they gave the Supreme Court the authority to claim jurisdiction over really important cases that affect all 67. And you can petition the 67 counties, and you can petition the Supreme Court and say, this really matters, and we need you to make a decision on this. So a host of litigants asked the Supreme Court to take up a King's Bench petition saying that the dates are immaterial to the act of voting. It's important to note that nobody really denies that fact, but it is built into Act 77 that you have to date your ballot. And so the litigants were asking, please sort of rule as immaterial dates, so dates cannot be the reason to reject a ballot. The Supreme Court denied that petition, so currently dates are required, and if dates are wrong, counties can reject your ballot for dates. The second King's Bench petition they denied was a petition to halt the practice of what we call notice and cure. So some counties, if you submit a ballot with the wrong date, will notify you and say, hey, you made an error, you have an opportunity to fix it. Why don't you come in and cure it? So they notice, they notify you, and then you can fix it. Not all counties do this, but some counties do, and it's really helpful when you make an error like a date error. There was a petition requested to halt the practice of notice and cure across the entire Commonwealth, and that was also denied. So both King's Bench petitions were denied. So counties that have notice and cure can continue to notify voters if they've made a mistake, and they can correct it. But also, dates cannot be one of the things they tell you that you've made I mean, if they can tell you, and you have to come in and correct it, because counties can reject your ballot if your date is wrong.
Thank you. All right. So with that, Mr. Gonzales is going to grab a microphone. And we have, so the students who registered for this were asked to submit questions if they. And so these 4 students have smart questions to ask.
Thank you for this discussion. My name is Brady Johnson, and I'm a student from Maryland. My question is, what can we do to overcome the increasing division in the country?
1 minute.
Repeat the question.
What can we do to overcome the divisions in the country? I think was right. Did I get that right? We have to start talking to each other away from politics, so we can be in the discussion about things prior to having written a person off because you know how they voted. And that is happening across the country, where people just don't associate with, don't talk with, and aren't interested in points of view other than the ones that make them comfortable. I don't think that we can overcome that in the political sphere. I think that has to come into the community. People, religious, social, Rotary, all these kinds of organizations need to find a way to facilitate interactions between people where the outcome is we find out how much we have in common as opposed to how much we have in division.
We are also living increasingly in politically segregated neighborhoods. So we know historically about racial segregation in the United States. We know about economic segregation in the United States. One of the most rapidly growing forms of segregation is political segregation. So we are not living with people, in community with people who have different views from us. And it makes it very difficult to get to know one another.
So I'm part of a fellowship, and half of the fellows are from the UK and half from the US. And I was asking one of the fellows from the UK, who was waxing on about how everybody who voted for Brexit, which was the removal of the UK from the European Union, was an idiot, dullard, completely uninformed. And so I paused for a second and I said, well, it passed. So there must be some people who were really smart and informed and educated who voted for it. Why would they say they voted for it? And he paused. He's like, I don't know. Because he never did the work of trying to understand why somebody else from an honest place with integrity, with the ability to think critically, might arrive at a different place than he would. I think that's the biggest challenge we have, and that can only happen, as Sam had said, with each of us being willing to do that work, to sit with the discomfort of listening to somebody who disagrees with us and not immediately judging, but allowing it to wave to rush over us, and for us to sit with it and understand they come to that authentically. I disagree, but it doesn't make them a bad person.
No, I was just going to thank you.
Hi, thank you for being here tonight. My name's Noel Fox. I'm a first-year student. I wanted to ask you guys, so a lot of people talked about the presidential election. I think that's like a big topic. That's like the first thing that people think of when it's election season. But could you talk about how the Senate election this time around is going to make up how the vote in Pennsylvania is going to make up the Senate?
So the Senate election. So there are about, I think there are 34 seats up. Yeah, there are about 34 seats up. 23 of them are currently held by Democrats. Only 11 are held by Republicans. One could argue 12 are basically already owned by Republicans because Manchin, with his decision not to run for re-election, West Virginia went like double digits for Trump. So in all likelihood, it'll be the Republican that's going to win that. The Democrats' road to maintain majority in the Senate is they need to win 2 seats, and one is already gone, and the other seats that are available to them are basically in pretty strong red districts. Pennsylvania is one of the few places, because Montana is also viewed as a state that's likely going to go to the Republicans. So Pennsylvania is one of those places that's hotly in play as either really giving Republicans an additional 51, I mean, I guess more than half, so that they would have a little bit more than one vote in terms of majority. And for the Democrats, it also feels like an opportunity then for them to retain an important seat so that they don't lose the majority or reduces the likelihood they're going to lose majority. So, and speaking to the McCormick campaign, they estimate $500 million will probably be spent in Pennsylvania for this one election, even though the numbers right now show that Casey is likely to win. His polling is very strong. But there are only a few seats that the Democrats have a chance to either retain, that are important for them to retain, and there's only a few seats that they have a chance to actually claim to gain the majority. So I think Pennsylvania is in play because it's one of those few places.
Yeah, there's essentially no, cutting to the chase a different way, there's essentially no way for the Democrats to control the Senate without Bob Casey winning. And even then, it would likely require a Harris victory, and Tim Walz becoming the vice president and casting tie-breaking votes. And as to the money, just a little anecdote as to the money, $500 million, including several $100,000 being raised just up the road in Montgomery County right now by President Biden, who is in our county even as we speak.
I would just say this also speaks to the importance of down ballot voting. So we spend so much time talking about the presidential election. You referred to this with the row races, but we spend so much time talking about the presidential election, and everybody is coming to Pennsylvania. I was saying I've got media requests from all over the world coming in asking about what do women think in Pennsylvania. And first I have to say the League of Women Voters isn't just for women. And also all eyes are on Pennsylvania. Because of this one race, when in fact there's a whole host of races that are also on your ballot. And we're going to be voting again in 6 months in municipal and judicial elections. And average turnout in mayoral elections across this country is 25%. It is as low as 10% or 9% in some municipalities. So it's really important to remember that these other races are really important. They're not only important for sort of who retains control of these institutions, but it's really important that you remember that the presidential election is just one race, and there's a whole bunch of other races. So vote down ballot, turn your ballot over, right? In this election, there's going to be 1 or 2 races on the back of your ballot, but that's it. It's like one race in some counties. Turn your ballot over, vote the back side of the ballot, right? These other races really matter.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Bunny Figueroa, and I'm a senior from Hatfield, Pennsylvania. I was wondering, in what ways does the two-party system affect civic engagement in young or new voters? I think it's limiting, and if you agree, what advice do you have to change that?
I think there's no question that it's limiting because I'm not in one of those parties. So I can't vote in primaries. But it used to be pretty clear what the differences were. I mean, I ran as a Republican, and I ran comfortably as a Republican in 1991, although I had been a Democrat, because Republicans stood for fiscal control and I was for school choice. And there were a lot of issues that I found made me comfortable. I find the denigration of immigrants uncomfortable. I find references to people's race and gender uncomfortable. And so I don't see a Republican Party, with all due respect, that stands for what it used to stand for. So maybe because I grew up in the world of Rockefeller Republicans, people like Bill Scranton, Hugh Scott, Bill Scranton II, Tom Ridge, those are people who were representing Pennsylvania. The kinds of people who the Republicans have put up, I'll take a Doug Mastriano, I'll even say Scott Wagner, are just not the kind of people who are going to find support in the center. And today, it seems to me that the Republican candidate for president is not looking to build support to the center or to away from his constituency, but rather to put more fear out so that his constituency turns out in greater numbers. That's a problem for the post-election conversation between people who disagree, when one of the leaders of the country is so willing to turn against the people in the country who are not in sync with him. That's a big hurdle to overcome. But I do think that we are in a place right now where if we don't turn this around and become a more united states, a more united country, to disagree, but not to want to see the other person get killed, or put into an insane asylum or prison, subject to military tribunals or any of that stuff. That's language that really is not going to help put the country in a place where we can find things to unite us and then get behind them to do them. And we have a lot of problems that need consensus so that politicians will act accordingly.
Yeah, I also think that young people are more and more independent thinkers, right? And they don't want to subscribe to this one party or another, right? They've seen both parties have policies that they don't agree with, right? And so I think, and that's, I think, really important about the way we engage is we never engage and talk about parties, because I think once you do that, it kind of gets young people in particular and people of color kind of distrustful, right? And so I do think more and more you'll see young people and people of color where they might like this, and this, right? Over here, and this, and this over here. And so what we're hoping, or what I'm hoping, is that as we get more and more young people participating who are kind of calling out everyone, right, and holding everyone accountable, we'll get back to a place of where we have more public servants again than a bunch of politicians.
I think one thing I would say, one thing to help foster that, though, is to address the closed primary system in the state of Pennsylvania. There are 1.3 million unaffiliated voters in the state of Pennsylvania, independent voters. They're registered voters. They want to vote. They cannot vote in the primaries. And if you look at the way, people are distributed on the sort of axis from left to right, when we are in closed primary systems, you have the people, the 10 to 15% who always vote in the primaries, are deciding elections. And you've got 1.3 million voters in Pennsylvania who can't participate in that decision process. So certainly one thing that would really empower, I think, young voters who feel distrustful of parties, or really just people who don't want to have to affiliate, is if we change the closed primary system in Pennsylvania. And that's something that you could just start lobbying for today.
Or educate young people, because I have grown people that call me on election day. They go to the polls on the primary and they're like, I can't vote. And so then I'll ask them, are you registered as an independent? Yes. But many people don't even realize that this is a closed primary state and what that means. And so educating young people, which we do in all of our engagement, also kind of helps them think about that ahead of time. So if they want to vote, kind of knowing a plan on how they can still participate.
I'll just say that we actually don't have a two-party system. It's just that the two parties have the most resources. And so a lot of times people don't want to vote for a libertarian or for the Green Party because they feel that's throwing their vote away, even if that's exactly where they're aligned in terms of values. I think it's worth noting in Philadelphia, we have 150,000 registered Republicans, and we have 17 registered Working Families Party members, but the Working Families Party won 2 seats in City Council. So it is entirely possible to have parties that are successful if they figure out how to campaign successfully, and it generally will happen more likely in a municipal election. We have independents in the Senate. Bernie Sanders is an independent in the U.S. Senate. So it is entirely possible for other parties to elevate. It's just very, very difficult because from a resource perspective, they just don't have the resources. And this isn't about party membership, because I just gave you the Working Families Party example. It's about having the resources to get enough attention to be compelling to the electorate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Hope White, and I'm a first year here at Arcadia from Newark, New Jersey. And my question for you is, speaking of the youth, what will be the particular impact of the youth in the vote in Pennsylvania?
Well, the youth are, I think, number 3. So there's Circle does a lot of research, in particular around young people. And so you are number 3 on the Youth Electoral Significance Index for president, and I believe number 7 for Senate. So you guys have a lot of power, and people all over, like they're calling about women, call us all the time because they want to know what young people are going to do, because young people are the largest voting bloc. So if you guys actually participated, you can pick the president. You can pick the president and up and down the ballot as well. So you have a lot of power. Exercise it. All right.
I'm a baby boomer, and we've been deciding this for a long time. So it's about time we stopped.
Those of you who've had class with me, Benny, you might have heard me say this. There are more of you than there are of all of us, right? If you got your act together, you would have a lot of power. But Pennsylvania youth do a really good job, and Arcadia voters actually do a really good job, right? So youth in Pennsylvania have had above average turnout in the last several elections. Yeah, and they rank 3 and 6, I think it is, on that scale for turnout in compared to other states. So people are watching what you're doing. If you all decide to vote, there's not a whole lot the rest of us can do
Can
about
I
it.
just close because we're in here with young people? Like, again, I worked in the Senate, right? I've done electoral politics. The first thing people do after this election is figure out who voted by age, who voted, as far as ethnicity, female, male. And so if they come out of this election and the analysis shows that young people voted in large numbers, you will see elected officials start coming and engaging you and trying to understand what you want to see done and figuring out how to prioritize the things you want to see. So they're very responsive to who votes. So vote, get your friends to vote, and I promise you, you'll start seeing a lot more elected leaders coming to college and saying, what can we do to keep you, voting in every election?
Thank you. So we have time for just a couple of questions from non-Arcadia, unless Jay has. Jay, do you have a question?
I am not a student at Arcadia. It's hard to believe. My name is Jay Penny from the Rotary Club of Chestnut Hill, and I have several questions. We're only going to do one.
Okay,
So
do them super fast.
that's okay. This one is really having to do with media. So John, who submitted this question, says that currently there are 6 companies that control most of the media in U.S. And if that's true, how involved are the owners in shaping those stories and narratives? And has this consolidation hurt democracy?
I mean, I'll say I'm getting requests from all sorts of media outlets, and we're seeing the candidates doing podcasts. I was listening to NPR today, and they sounded a little old. I listened to NPR. They were like, why is Harris doing all these podcasts? And you're like, well, there's millions of voters listening to podcasts. So while there is hyper consolidation of corporate media, there are 6 major media companies. They control our radio, they control our newspapers, they control a lot. There has been a proliferation of a diversity of media and independent journalists who are feeling really empowered. I don't know if they're reaching out to you to reach out and just start asking questions. And their audiences might be small, but they're there. There are other models of media that are growing, nonprofit models, cooperative models. There are other models of media that are emerging to combat that. And they're out there trying to cover this election, and they have an audience. So I would say to combat the consolidation, find those media outlets that matter to you, listen to them and support them, or read them and support them, and ask them to hit the road because they seem willing to do it from my perspective.
There's a lot of investment in, youth, people of color, right? Getting different perspectives. And I have seen in my experience in working with youth, they're not really interested in, those traditional media sources, and so they are getting a lot of education and information from other sources as well. So keep doing that.
So, no. So the issue with the media isn't that there are 6 companies. It's that many of them are viewed as ideologically aligned, and we've seen some examples of that. You saw Uri Berliner, who used to be at NPR, got ousted because he had the audacity to reveal that in their internal survey, they didn't have a single conservative on their editorial or news staff. And by even suggesting that that was something they should work on, he was basically unceremoniously dumped from the institution and now writes for the Free Press, which is actually a really good, if you don't check them out, they're really terrific. It was founded by Barry Weiss, who herself used to work for the New York Times, also progressive, who got ousted because she decided to take a pure journalistic approach to the way that she would write, which meant weighing both sides and allowing for the articulation of conservative voices. So there are conservatives who feel very strongly that the consolidation of the media has allowed for a singular narrative to go out, and it therefore creates an environment which we currently see, which I think rises the temperature. So when you see, you may not be tuning in, maybe you're watching the podcast or you're looking at your Twitter feed or your TikTok feed, but what is the source of what that information that you're getting? It comes from the 6 news sources who then give give you the clips who become viral and animate people to either be really, really angry or to decide they want to champion a particular viewpoint because they're on my team. I think it's terrible, and we're seeing it play out now with this CBS anchor from CBS Morning, who they're having a struggle session at CBS because he had the audacity to ask questions around the Israel-Hamas conflict in a way that put their guest on the back foot a bit. It allowed for really incredible, if you watch it, it's a valuable discussion. Everybody left feeling good about themselves. The guy got to air his opinion. But because he even had the audacity to ask the questions in the way that he did, there are calls for him to be fired. This is terrible. I think we've lost our journalistic integrity because it's all about the clicks, and it's about who's following you, and it's about speaking to your audience. It's not challenging your audience to be open to the fact that there are other viewpoints.
Time for one more.
Okay, one more. This one's from David, not this David. This might be short. What is the likelihood of getting rid of the Electoral College?
None.
There are legislative fixes around it. So getting a constitutional amendment to get rid of the Electoral College would be very difficult because of exactly what Sam referenced. You're asking people to give up power, which is not really in our small c constitution, not capital C constitution. We are not often ready to give up power. There are other statutory fixes to it. So states could agree to engage in a certain compact that would distribute votes differently, right? So there are other fixes that would make the outcome feel more representative, that would make California purple, because lots of California is Republican, and we never hear from them, right? And so there are ways that we could make the map look more representative going around the Electoral College. I think it's going to be difficult to get that passed.
I would be very skeptical, not to be argumentative, because what we're asking people to do, we're asking politicians who own the system to change it so they can own it. Now, I'm a politician, and I can tell you, I'm not voting for that. The idea, however, that California might go to a congressional district, popular vote, and California would have 53 or whatever they have, and 42 of them would be for this one and 12. Well, the Democrats in California are never going to let that happen. And the Republicans in Montana are never going to let it happen. So it just, once people get power institutionally, giving it up, it's not in human nature. And politics really is about human nature. We elect the people who best represent us. I would bet you the people in that district in Georgia that are represented by that lady think she's the person they want. And she is the person they want because she gets, 60, 70% of the vote. They are who we are. And when we get something, with all due respect to each of us and our eleemosynary character, we want to keep it. And that power is the one thing that humans give up most reluctantly.
And remember, we tried this in Philadelphia when Northeast Philly was trying to secede, right? How'd that work out?
So this is great because,
I was thinking of changing my registration to the Working Families Party because maybe I could win.
Only 18 registered voters.
So this is great because they all said something that allows me to try and come up with a summative statement, which is politicians do what works for them. And that goes to Angie's point, which is that means if you, the younger people in this room, outvote us, the older people in this room, who, as Sam said, the baby boomers have been running the show for an awfully long time. We haven't done a very good job of it. So if you take the power away from us, the politicians will listen to you. And that's why ultimately, more than Pennsylvania mattering most, you all who go to Arcadia and the other colleges around the country and the high schools around the country and the middle schools around the country, you're the ones who matter most. So go vote. Thank you. Some of us can stay and answer more questions if you want.
you.